This is the Silver Case, Unlimited Run Games, the complete run. And finally, to wrap up our survey of Limited Run Games' 2016 library, we have this last major release. Technically, the Silver Case wasn't the final 2016 release, having shipped in October 2016, but it's the only release without a catalog number, and therefore exists slightly outside the core continuum. No number? That's right. The Silver Case was Limited Run's first release for PC, specifically for Windows, and it set the standard for releases outside the company's primary platforms. To date, games for PlayStation Vita, PlayStation 3, 4, and 5, and Nintendo Switch have been officially numbered. But other platforms see fewer and less frequent releases, including PC, Nintendo Entertainment System, Sega CD, and Nintendo 3DS, have been excluded from the official numeration, meaning fans don't have to venture into what can sometimes be very esoteric systems in order to maintain a tidy, complete run on their shelves. However, just because the Silver Case doesn't have a number on the box doesn't mean it's an inessential release. On the contrary, its platform is probably the least remarkable thing about it. This is a great game with a rich history behind it, and the Limited Run game's physical release is a notable part of that history. There's a bit of history at play on the Limited Run side of things as well, with this being the company's first deluxe boxed release. While this series has touched on a few games that have shipped in lavish collector's edition packages, including Saturday Morning RPG, the Shantae games, and 2 Oddworld titles, all of those more elaborate releases debuted in later years. Back in Limited Run's first year, the closest thing to a collector's edition was an Octodad bundle that came with a necktie, or maybe the fold-out poster in Firewatch. Big boxes and interesting collectibles would come later as standard fare, but here in 2016 the Silver Case stood alone. And it is a truly outstanding game. Directed and co-written by Goichi Suda, better known as Suda51, the Silver Case was a first for Suda as well, the debut release from his fledgling company Grasshopper Manufacture. Suda had spent the previous decade or so working at Human Entertainment, adding his own distinctive point of view to games like Fire Pro Wrestling, but ultimately he chose to go independent. The Silver Case, which originally debuted in 1999 for Sony's original PlayStation, is a landmark indie game too. Years before the idea of the indie gaming movement existed, the Silver Case works a lot like what you'd expect to see in a present-day indie release. Though Suda's company received some financial support from ASCII, a major publisher at the time, the Silver Case was still created with a tiny team on a shoestring budget. Suda therefore didn't target the big trendy genres and concepts of the era. Rather than put together a CGI-heavy role-playing game or 3D character action game, he instead chose to dive into the past. The Silver Case was built in the format of a detective adventure, a genre that had been absolutely massive in Japan during the late 80s, but had largely fallen out of favor by 1999. No doubt the format's fall from grace had much to do with the difficulty inherent in translating such text-heavy projects into English. As the Japanese games industry began to take on a more international focus, a genre that largely consisted of text and static images demanded a steep investment for localization into other languages, with little guarantee of success. And in fact, Limited Run's October 2016 release of the game marked its first official appearance in English, making it a critical link in the Suda51 canon. You can see many of the themes and concepts that would resurface throughout Suda's work later taking form here. Most of the action in the Silver Case amounts to moving through limited environments on a linear rail, interacting with objects and other characters at key nodes, a format that would form the rather controversial basis for the bizarre GameCube shooter adventure Killer 7. At the same time, the narrative of the Silver Case takes place in a fictional near-future version of Japan heavily inspired by the novels of William Gibson and American thrillers like 12 Monkeys, with its focus divided between 2 hard-boiled point-of-view characters. The game's transmitter phase follows the work of a police investigator as he seeks out the truth behind a series of gruesome murders committed by a serial killer named Kamui, a darker, more challenging take on the 8-bit murder mystery games that had been so popular on 8-bit consoles and computers in Japan. The placebo phase, on the other hand, puts an unexpected twist on things, placing players in the shoes of a journalist rather than a cop. The shift in perspective also speaks to Suda's ambitions with the Silver Case. Despite being set in a fictionalized future, the game's story is heavily inspired by current events of the day. For those who choose to think carefully about the game, Suda has plenty to say about the state of society here. A common theme in his work, even in seemingly lighthearted action titles such as No More Heroes. The Silver Case also hints at Grasshopper Manufacturer's creative approach in general. While not lacking in substance, there's plenty of style here. The interface takes the windowed design of old 8-bit adventures and the cinema sequences of games like Phantasy Star IV, then modernizes them with a flashy overlay and vibrant backgrounds. This is almost entirely superficial, but the point isn't to disguise a lack of content or quality, rather it's a way to handwave a modest budget. The silver case's dazzling visual embellishments do a great job of disguising the fact that this is ultimately an indie game produced by a small team. There's always something moving and active on screen, creating a constant sensation of action. But these superficial details never distract from the dialogue or the quest. Suda would be one of the first developers to habitually veer away from the industry's trend toward realism, using stylish visuals to create games that looked interesting despite being unable to go toe-to-toe with the output of much larger studios. Fittingly, Suda's team on the silver case would go on to become the core of Grasshopper manufacture. While the music in this remastered version has been remixed by Silent Hill's Akira Yamaoka, the original compositions were created by Masafuki Takada of No More Heroes fame. Likewise, character designer Takashi Miyamoto would collaborate on design for Killer 7, while Suda's co-writers Masahi Uoka and Saki Kato would play a large role in the follow-up game, Flower Sun Rain. It's fitting then that such a noteworthy release would receive an equally significant package for its American debut. In addition to the game disc, the limited run release also contained a soundtrack CD, an art book, and a pair of full-color foldouts to help introduce players into the game's fascinating world, all contained in a large cardboard box. And that wraps it up for the limited run catalog for 2016. The series is going on a bit of a hiatus as I put together a companion book compiling all the content and images for this video series. When it returns, we'll be diving directly into the year 2017, the year that limited run got big.